All right. Was there any 3rd century father who taught papal infallibility?
A 3rd century father that taught papal infallibility in explicit terms? Because Saint Cyprian, I believe, is in the middle of the 200s. He characterizes the Roman Church, as I pointed out before, as the teaching chair of Peter. And,
so if he held to that view, would he dispute doctrine with the Pope?
Absolutely. There's a number of individuals that can dispute doctrine with the Pope, that can dispute certain teachings of the Pope, for instance, there's a number of people that, argued against Liberius. Jerome, in fact, himself argued with a number of individuals, even arguing with the Pope in one instance. It doesn't mean that because a certain church father argues with an individual that they are denying the office or the papal primacy of the individual.
So what could possibly be evidence that I could present to you that would persuade you that they didn't believe it? If they don't teach it explicitly and they argue with the Pope, what more do I need to show you to get you to believe that they don't believe that the Roman bishop is an infallible?
Well, if you're attempting to try and prove that this verse is incorrect, you're going to have to do a lot of work in disproving Matthew chapter 16:19 and disproving what the fathers taught as well. Just because a certain father in the 1st century doesn't fit your criteria of believing in infallibility, you're arguing from silence. You're saying that Ignatius never talked about a singular bishop. It doesn't mean that Ignatius didn't believe in papal infallibility. I'm not saying that he believed in it either. I'm talking about the fact that he believed that the Roman see was free from error. I specifically said that Ludwig Ott, as I pointed out, is clear. He says himself.
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry. I guess I'm trying to ask you this question. Can you name me a father who explicitly teaches the doctrine of papal infallibility? Even one father who explicitly teaches it.
Well, as I'll point out one more time in my opening statement, I'll read exactly what I read again. Ludwig Ott says that the fathers did not expressly speak of the infallibility of the Pope, but they attest to decisive teaching authority of the Roman Church and of its pontiff.
Okay, so to answer the question that I asked, are there any fathers who explicitly teach it?
Explicitly, there are none that explicitly teach it, no.
And are there many fathers?
In explicit terms of papal infallibility as outlined by Vatican I, absolutely no, there are not.
And are there any fathers who argue with bishops of Rome over doctrine?
Define doctrine.
I don't define doctrine.
No, I understand that, but define what you mean by doctrine. It is clear that you don't define doctrine, but define what you mean by doctrine.
Well, what it means for Vatican II, matters of faith and morals.
Do
they argue with them on matters of faith and morals?
You mean Vatican I?
Do the fathers argue with bishops of Rome over matters of faith and morals?
Have they argued in the past? Absolutely, yes, they have.
Yes, and
but this does not deny
when the fathers turn to passages like Luke 22:32, did they find anything close to infallibility in those passages?
I don't see how they would find anything close to infallibility in those offices if the church has never put forth that verse teaches papal infallibility. So I don't see how the fathers would find that in that verse.
Well, the Vatican I says we're not supposed to interpret scriptures in any way contrary to the unanimous consent. If the fathers never found it, how is that not contrary to unanimous consent?
Vatican I did not formally define Luke chapter 22, just to inform you. So Vatican I and Vatican II for that matter, which reiterated Vatican I, is not going against anything that was taught by the fathers. And nowhere did any father also bring up Luke 22 in a sense of denying anything of the office of the papacy. So I still don't know why you're hinging upon Luke 22.
How about any of these 3 verses? Not one of these 3 verses, from what you've told me.
Luke 22 and John 15.
One of these 3 verses by the Father were interpreted the way you want to interpret them by the fathers. How is that not?
I would disagree. I would disagree with you completely. I would disagree with you completely. I think a number of fathers interpreted Matthew 16:19, and in fact, a number of fathers interpreted John 21:15 exactly in the way that the church has always interpreted as Peter being the chief shepherd. I think you're completely incorrect in that.
I didn't talk about chief shepherd. I'm talking about papal infallibility.
You're right, but
chief shepherd is one thing.
You're right, but you're bringing up these verses and saying that none of the fathers interpreted them in the way that they're being interpreted within the parameters of Vatican I, and you're incorrect about that. I've listed over 20 fathers.
I'm not talking about all the things that Vatican I says. I'm talking about papal infallibility, the subject of this debate. Did they interpret them to mean papal infallibility? Any of the fathers?
John chapter 21:15. No, John chapter 21:15. It speaks about Peter being the chief shepherd. It does not explicitly reference papal infallibility, so it would be absurd for any father to try and interpret in that manner, because the church has never said that John chapter 21:15 is meant to be interpreted in that manner. So that doesn't make any sense at all.
So if you interpret it that way, you would be interpreting it contrary to the unanimous consent.
If I interpreted John chapter 21:15 to be teaching papal infallibility explicitly, absolutely. I'm not the church. Okay. I don't interpret verses contrary to the church.